So we are going to talk about the impact of COVID, which I should have all capped, sorry about that, on preventive care. This is an interesting thing that happened. And I think the narrative, at least among PCCs, is different than the narrative that is being promoted by a lot of other medical sources. And I don't want to say I've done my research, because when anyone says that in the context of COVID, it means you're an idiot. But I've done some research, okay, and I've dug into this. And what I've been digging into, though, by the way, is I've been digging into your work, and that's what we're going to talk about. So, the session goals. I'm going to explain the change to preventive care that occurred during the peak of the COVID pandemic. We're going to recognize the importance and benefit of active preventive care, and we're going to identify changes to make in practice to preserve and improve the preventive care impact of your practice. Now, before I get into this, let me say this about those two words at the end of that title, preventive care. Preventive care is by far the single most important thing you do. Nothing is even close. That's easy for me to say, because I don't do it. But preventive care is what saved your butts during COVID. Okay, I can say that now. Until then, the previous 20 years of my career, I had to give you 10 other reasons why preventive care was important. I have a whole presentation on this, but let me restate it. Preventive care is by far the most important work you do. And that's why I'm focusing on this. I mean, it is, after all, for example, your distinctive competency, because other specialties can do all the other stuff you do. I can fake being a pediatrician for months before anyone catches me. And if you're offended by that, realize that Walgreens and Walmart are doing it right now. Okay? It's easy. The fact is, in pediatrics, almost everything resolves on its own. That's why we had witch doctors for thousands of years. You have peers who throw antibiotics at everything. All right? And they get to be called pediatricians too. So the well visits are your special competency. It's the one thing that so that's why when the pharmacies start coming for your immunizations, you should be sounding every alarm, because that is your space and that is your magic. The thing that you do better, and the thing that you do that no one else can do, is actually take care of moms. You give them confidence and you give them guidance, your teachers. That's more important than everything else. And so that's why I'm focusing on preventive care. I have a lot more to say about that, but I only have an hour and I already used up 10 minutes. Does everyone remember this day? The date officially, Tuesday, March 17th? That is the day that that's the day that the music died, was right there, okay? We were all freaking out. So we were freaking out like everyone else was, and then we were also freaking out because, we know what this means for us. And just to be clear, when I say us, I mean you already were seeing a huge, that was the day you had no patients, okay? Yep, all right, that was the paper the next day, okay? So you're right, it was actually technically we saw it on Thursday and Friday before, depends on where you were, a little bit, and then boom, okay? Now, I say that because when your visits go south, our business goes south. So we were freaking out too. Plus, we were all worried. People are getting sick. People are dying. This was concerning. And I will forever recognize the shape of this graph, no matter what the dimensions are of it. And I will say that is March and April 2020, and you were measuring something in healthcare, because it was blip, 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 and then it dropped. And the big green line, this was the graph I showed, I think, on the third or fourth webinar I did with Polly. This was the graph I showed because we were starting to quantify. I couldn't quantify the drop-off until about the first week of March, because it takes a week or two for the data to start to look like something. And this is the graph I showed. And, I mean, you can look at it. I know this was done using relative volumes, okay? So if the relative volume of visits is 100% through March 9th, and then by March 30th, our total visit volume is down 60-70%. We were freaking out. Now, there were two levels of freaking out that I witnessed, and I was there for all of it just like you were. The first one was like, oh my God, we're not going to pay bills, okay? Putting that whole big issue aside, because we talked about a lot, this is the thing that people were talking about. And I know I was personally really bothered by this. So this was something that kept me up at night. We saw right away, and I said out loud, we are going to have a measles outbreak because of COVID, which didn't happen as an aside. All right, but we had a measles outbreak because of COVID. The vaccines were dropping, and it just so happens that your data I don't know if you know this, your data was on the cover of the New York Times. Did you know that? Because they talked to us. And what we saw here was vaccine rates drop dangerously as parents avoid doctor's visits. And what we were seeing is, of course, it made sense that if your well visits were dropping 50%, weren't we going to see vaccine rates drop? Weren't we going to see any other kind of screening drop? Depression screening, behavioral screening, vision screening, hearing. Well, of course they are. And what I said to this reporter, in fact, was because this came out in April. I said the thing I was using as my target was HPV vaccines. I don't know why, but because they sort of stand alone. They're given older. They're not part of a batch. I had some sense already that a lot of the younger kids were still coming in, at least. Maybe not as much, but it wasn't as big a deal. But with HPV, I said, one of the hidden impacts of COVID is that in 10 or 20 years, a bunch of people are going to die again of HPV-related cancer because of COVID. I was worried. And then we had, the national reports, the Wall Street Journal. We also made it into this one. And by we, again, I mean you. This is your data. We got into the journal there. And this is another slide. I took this it's like slide 11. I don't know which week that is. I was talking about this. That yellow line is HPV. HPV volume, by the time we hit April, was down 65%, or was down, I'm sorry, this is backwards, it's down 40%. DTaP MMR. This stuff was freaking me out. So, the narrative quickly became this, all right? And I forgot, I just realized I didn't put the slide in, because the CDC in October, okay, a few months later, they often have data that's about 6 months old. In October, put out a very, very scary study. You've all read it, you've all seen it, because that's what people talked about. But there are a couple things that mitigated this. Okay, first of all, the important math is not this, even though it is the measure that I used here. I'm going to show you some other measures in a minute. Right here, I was using total vaccine volume, okay? But the real measure of the math, okay, is the number of overdue patients. It's really the coverage measure that you need, okay? It's not how many well visits did I do in this month. It's how many kids are overdue for well visits. That's really the important measure. And here's the thing. If you go from having a 100% coverage rate, every single kid you get, right? Every single kid you get who needs an HPV shot, you've immunized them. They're at 100% coverage, HPV. If you, as of April 1st, because of COVID, no longer give an HPV shot, not a single one of those kids comes in. Only 1/12 of your patient base is actually affected. Not all of them. It's only the kids who are due in that month, or 8.3%. Right? There's a little magic math in here. And in any given month, if you didn't do a single well visit, that only affects the 8.3% of the kids who were due that month. And it also becomes a little bit more slippery with vaccines, because vaccines are a little bit different from a well visit. The moment you're a year from your last well visit, you're overdue. That's not true with vaccines. It's a minimum interval, and you're not technically overdue for a while. You're due. You can get your vaccine now, but if using some of the HPV measures, for example, there's quite a wide range of when it's acceptable. So even though the volume did fall off substantially, the rate at which it was affecting your patients was not as profound as I first thought. Part one. Part two. We were lucky in some ways with COVID because it couldn't have happened at a better time. It happened right as we were transitioning from the biggest flu season we'd seen in a long time, well, certainly in a little while, and going into the well visit section where a lot of people were already queued up for their well visits. If it had happened in the middle of one of those other times, we would have had a huge problem. So remember, this was March and April. By May, June, July, and we're going to look at the numbers in a little bit, you were starting to recover. Here's the visit volume. All right, let's take a look. That red line, that's your well visit volume, okay? And this is, I took all the well visits our clients did and distributed them by practice. So this is the average practice well visit volume, okay? That was one way to normalize things. And what happened was that well visit volume plummeted, but by May, June, July, you had already figured out that the sick kids weren't coming in. Everyone was at home. Now, and it wasn't simply because they were afraid, it was also because they weren't getting sick. So what did you do? It's this magic, where'd my red line go? It's this magic right here. You actually did more well visits in the summer of 2020 than you had ever done before. So there's no question that this dip right here meant kids didn't get immunized, kids didn't get screened, kids didn't get checked for child abuse neglect, kids didn't get any of those things that make you magic as a pediatrician. But holy cow, did you make up for it? If I cut this off, it fills that hole quite nicely. So I'm going to talk, I might come back to the slide, I'm going to talk only at first, at least, about what happened in the first part and through 2020. Now, this sick visit volume, this is the other reason why COVID felt so painful. You were coming off, I will tell you, the months from October through January, October 2019 through January 2020, were the busiest time PCC had ever measured previously. You were swamped. Now, maybe not your practice, but across all of you, the busiest time in PCC history before COVID was literally in the months before COVID. So when you jumped off the diving board, you went to the one higher. If it had been the previous winter, which is a pretty mild thing, that blue line, which looks so scary, it looks like the worst roller coaster of all time, that would have been about halfway down, and it doesn't look as bad. And so what happened was you felt scared because you were jumping off a higher point. You were jumping off a point where, I don't know if you remember this, but you were saying at the time, oh my God, make it stop. Yeah, be careful what you wish for, okay? So if we had been a little bit lower, we wouldn't have noticed. And that well visit impact was not as big as I thought. Not as big as I thought. And just so you know, just as an aside, I didn't show the slide. At the end of the year, I did the math, and on average, relatively speaking, revenue-wise, PCC clients were only down 4% by the end of the year. I realize if you're in the Northeast, that was not the same as being in Texas, okay? There are big parts of this country who never felt a thing, all right? And there are other parts of the country, the Northeast and the Northwest, who got hit really hard, okay? If you were in New York City, you're still not recovered, okay? But there are parts of, frankly, the red states who didn't skip a beat. So your mileage may vary, but that is what it looks like on average right there. Now, I think I'm going to have to come back to this slide. So let me show you the actual results, because remember, what's important is what actually happens to the measures. This isn't measuring volume of well visits. This is literally your well visit coverage, all right? And I'm going to walk through them. And I think everyone in here who has the PCC dashboard can look at this data for themselves. You can go see your own numbers. But let's take a look. Up at the top, that maroon line, that is the well visit coverage. I know what it is without even looking. That's the infant well visit coverage. And let's be clear, I mean, PCC measures, I mean, you guys know this. We know whether they missed their 1 month and their 6 month, and like we track those smaller intervals. Those kids came in, you already know that. The parents did not skip those visits as a rule. So that one, I'm just gonna leave aside. And guess which visits you do the most? Those visits, a ton of them. Those kids came in the entire time, all right? So I can say, because I can barely read this right now, oh, I'm not allowed off the stage. So like in January 2020, what is that, 80-something%? 88? Yep, oh, I'm sorry. So that you can see it did go down slightly, ever so slightly, but by the time it ended, all right, this is January 2021, by the time it ended, and you'll see this through all of these, every single preventive care measure was as high or higher than it was before COVID. And that, again, shouldn't be a surprise, because what was happening in January 2020? You were getting crushed by sick visits. So take a look at the blue line. The blue line is the 3 to 6 year olds. That's what was scaring me. It's at 77% to start, and it dips, and that is right. That's February, May, but by the time the end of the year rolls around, you guys have gotten a lot of those 3 and 6 year olds in. And look what happens with each one of these. That's the ADHD follow-up. The ADHD follow-up, that's our little rule that says you have seen your active ADHD kids within every 4 months. Right? That's one of the dashboard measures. It is the one that falls off the most, because guess who didn't come in? Because, all right, yeah. And like, if you're going to forego an appointment, all right, that's not a life or death thing for most kids. It's not like it didn't happen. But it fell off the most. But look at the other ones, and then look at the dark green at the bottom, the well visits for the 7 to 11s, and it climbed right up. Now the one I'm sorry, I totally read that wrong. I meant this one, the HPV. The HPV went from 57 to 60%. Your HPV coverage actually improved during COVID. That totally goes against the grain of the narrative that everyone else is saying. Now, I look, when I saw this, when there's a CDC paper that says basically millions and millions of kids didn't get these vaccines this year, I mean, I tend to believe them, all right? They count vaccines, all right? But I'm actually counting the coverage based on the rules for each of you. Do I believe that PCC practices behaved differently and were able to achieve success that perhaps other practices didn't? Yes, I do. I think that's part of it. You all had really nice recall tools. You all had people there supporting you the whole time. I don't know who's watching on the camera right now, probably a bunch of OP clients, but the fact is, all right, smart practices use PCC, okay? I'm not surprised by this. I'm not measuring, and I'm going to get to this in a little bit. I am not looking at disparities of care here. I have no way to look into the kids who don't see a pediatrician. Zero. I have zero doubt whatsoever that kids who don't see a pediatrician suffered massively during COVID. All right, but I couldn't measure that. I began this chase by saying, oh my God, what is going to be the HPV impact on our clients? I was starting to build in April and May of 2020. I was talking to Polly. I'm like, Polly, we are going to have to figure out how to do HPV vaccine clinics. Like, we're going to have to start setting these things up in a different way. I was actually envisioning, frankly, your HPV coverage isn't that great to begin with, okay? I've always wanted to really hammer down on it, but I was like, the HPV, to me, represents all the adolescents who are missing. And the adolescents are the ones that really make me nervous, okay? And so I'm like, if I can figure out how we can get all these adolescents back in, and the HPV is just one of those measures, that's what I was building, but I couldn't show it. I couldn't prove it. And what I'm seeing here is that the PCC response was actually a lot better than I thought. Now I want to show you this. This is the same graph, all right? But this starts in 2020 and goes to 2022. This goes right up through May, okay? These lines will look a little bit different because they are squished differently. So see this dark blue line right here? Adolescent. I'm in the first graph, I go right to about here. It's just squished, okay? It's the same data. I mean, I'm too lazy to make another set of data. So here's the same data. So what happened afterwards, though, was this. If we go back, so you rocketed up and did all those well visits at the end of 2020. But then look at what's happened to the sick visits this entire time. They've continued to climb, and oh my gosh, was the fall of 21 brutal. Because see this peak right here, see this huge peak? That was the flu. And guess what? You do the flu in your sleep, all right? And it's not just the flu, those are also flu shots in there. It's like that, and it's bad. A bad flu season is bad, but it does not compare to, look at this. This is like a 1, 2, 3, 4 week peak. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is like a 2-month peak where it was all, this is what happened. The kids went back to school, so they got sick again. And then you had to add on all those new COVID visits. You had to squish in how many tests, labs, immunization, like all this new extra layer. Do I have a picture of it? Hold on. No, I don't have a picture of it here. It's in another slide deck, sorry. You have this whole extra layer of visits that you never had to do. So what happens here? Look at this. What happens here when here's your that's the end of your summer. That's July, August. It's still a good well visit batch. But what happens right here, this week, right here, that first, second week of August, where the things flip again, and you will see these things started to go down again. There's that peak, 6, 7, 8, 9. So this is the adolescent well visits. They peaked at the end, or like January through April of 2021, and then they've slowed back down again. And that's what this is right here. This is this extended run, this multi-week run. Well, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This 3-month run where you actually did more well visits than sick visits, you've never seen that before. But you got blown up again because of what happened in the fall. And so all the numbers have more or less returned to normal. Some of them have improved a little bit. You do have slightly better well visit coverage in part, okay? This is the math of it. In any given month, if you do 100 well visits, those kids who are caught up stick with you for the next 12 months. So you can add kids at a rate faster than you can lose them. And so that's why they held on for a little bit. But now, where we're at is basically where we were before COVID, which, if you had told me in, April, May 2020, that, hey, in the summertime 2022, everything will actually be back to where it was, I wouldn't have believed you. Now, there are some regional differences. I have a group of, I just picked one. This isn't scientific. I don't want you to look, because I looked at a couple, and I was just looking for places where there were real regional differences. And this is adolescent well visit coverage. Okay, so East, South, Central, our clients there had a massive improvement in their adolescent coverage. I mean, there's a data sample size issue. All it takes, but it's legit. But there are some, the fact that our practices here in New England, which are up here at the top, have an adolescent coverage rate, this is between 75 and 80%, and our East, South, Central are below 50% for a lot of it. Like, that's a huge gap for the same measure. The fact that even though they're somewhat parallel, you'll see that some parts of the country got hit differently than others. I don't have a huge conclusion from this, except for just be reminded that not everyone was in the same circumstance. If I took each of your individual practices, which maybe I'll do next time. You can look at your acronym and be like, take it down. But it looks a lot like that. All right. So then, however, let's get back to the disparities question. I remain very concerned about the disparities of care. This is Merck put out a pretty decent paper about the data gap and the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on vaccination rates, and they did this whole piece. Now, of course, Merck is going to do this, all right? They want everyone to get that vaccine, and they want one of those $2.5 billion Moderna contracts. But they go through and they were looking at vaccine rates and how they were impacting people based on race. Now, so you know, it is difficult for PCC to get good measures relating to disparity of health from your data. And the reason is, for the most part, you don't track the race of your patients. I think PCC has something like, PCC's got over 1 million kids whose data we can track, and I think we've got 70,000 kids who are marked as anything except for Caucasian. Most of the overwhelming majority are like nothing. They're not marked. Yeah. Not even, chose not to say, just like literally not marked. And so it's there's not a huge number. I did do an analysis before COVID of flu shot coverage based on race, but I was not, and I wrote a blog about it, and the results on the face of them are pretty clear, okay? There's a substantial difference in flu shot coverage based on race, but the problem is I wasn't that confident in the data. Like I believe the result, but the data scientifically wasn't great, especially because if I know that the tracking of race is sporadic, what I don't have is, I can't say, okay, in your practice act, actually you track it really well, so I could look at yours. What happens is it's sporadic even within the practice. Oh, they tracked it for, this practice has 200 kids and this practice has 800 kids, and I've been to that practice and that should be 8,000. So I don't have great data about this. Now, so what do you do when you don't have great data about race? You cheat and use Medicaid. And part of me doesn't feel that bad about cheating because in a way, we also know that, yes, although there are unequivocally racial disparities, this is also very much a socioeconomic disparity. And let's just spread that net a little wider and see what we get. And something really funky came up. Because again, or what I was looking for here was, I was looking for data that would allow me to lecture to you. Hey, look, you guys did a great job during COVID, but guess who you missed? You weren't taking care of those Medicaid kids. That is not the story I can tell. In fact, something I can't explain yet came up, and I sliced this 50 ways. She was here, but she left. I talked to Suzanne Berman about this like 10 times. I'm like, look at this data and tell me what I'm missing. Like we cut it up, and she did point some things out, but I couldn't get to it. Now, this is a little hard to read. Let me show you what these numbers do. I want you to look at I'll give you the one that really shows the example, okay? I want you to look at the yellow line and the green line. The yellow line and the green line. Yeah, I know those codes don't mean anything, but I'll explain. The M stands for Medicaid. The P stands for private. The 394 stands for a 99394. So what I'm saying is the yellow line, and for 2020, okay? The yellow line represents the relative well visit volume performed by our clients from Medicaid 99394s versus private insurance 99394s. So what this is basically saying is, at what rate, okay, did the Medicaid kids come in for their adolescent visits relative to the private kids? And what you can see here is this. I'll show you the interesting parts. At first, during this, and this is by week, this is 2020, okay? This is the first couple of weeks of 2020. This is where COVID hits, right? We drop off right here. But you'll notice the private kids drop off more. Then they both shoot up, and the private kids make up for it by coming back more. You see that? The green line goes from below the Medicaid to above. But look at what happens in the fall. I don't get it. This whole thing here, this plummet, all right, and then the Medicaid kids continue to come in at a higher rate. So what I don't And the data supports it. Like the Medicaid coverage, everywhere I could look for it, was as good as it was before or better. I don't know. I don't know what happened here. Now, I've had some conjecture. We have, and these are the adolescent visits. These aren't all the WIC visits, right? These aren't, so this is all of 2020. That's month 51, 52. So this is right here is this is Thanksgiving, okay, and this is Labor Day, I believe. So right about when school starts, the well visits plummet for everyone, but the Medicaid visits stay high. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know why this is. Well, except they were already behind by more down here. Like they dropped more, and you're like, but this is one of those things where what I expected the entire time was to see that there was absolutely a disparity, and I'm not seeing it. So that is one thing I looked into a little bit, but this is my thought. So yes, we already know, I can tell you that PCC clients' rate of Medicaid visits overall has gone up about 9%. Your average PCC client's Medicaid volume's gone up 9%, but that didn't really start happening until 2021. Everyone was still getting covered here. That's why I looked at 2020. I mean, like I fished in the same pond. I was like, oh, wait a minute, I have to adjust this for the shift in Medicaid. And I went and I was like, it hadn't happened yet. So I don't know. I don't know. Yep. So you're saying the absence of sports. So then the implication is that the kids who are on Medicaid do not do sports at the same rate. Okay, so and I'm not trying to be politically correct. I'm just saying, like, I want to get you. Yep. Yeah, so that makes it fascinating to me. So that's good. Yes, please.
I can tell you for us, it's the wellness centers at the schools. They are doing the wellness visits, and they're actually billing the insurances for physicals. And it means less kids are coming to us for their physicals every year. And if they try to come to us for their physical, the insurance company kicks it back.
So I would have torches and pitchforks. That is someone gunning for you. Yeah. I would be losing my mind. So I can't even talk about that. So there is. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, because it's kind of up there. There is a school thing in here, and wouldn't that be an interesting side effect of COVID? That the Medicaid kids actually got slightly better coverage because their motivation was not sports. You know, that's what I was seeing in here. Now, so what do we do? Okay, this is the lecture I would give at every pediatric event I've ever been to. All right, it is patient recall. And then right now, what you should be doing, though, is you should be running reports. You have PCC, and you should be identifying the kids who really did fall off the wagon. What are you going to do to get those 30, 40, 50% of your teenagers in regardless? Because things have really slowed down, haven't they? All right. It depends on where you're. Well, okay, so some people are saying no, but no, I have some clients who when March and April hit, the well started to dry up again. And one of the problems was, okay, what I found is, I'm saying this very subjectively, I can't prove it, the practices who before COVID depended heavily on seeing all of their well visits during the summer suffered more. And the practices who had the flexibility and interest and willingness to do well visits whenever you can do well visits We're able to go right to the drawing board right now and say, let's get these kids in. The people who had a better distribution of well visit timing, oh, I should do that. Oh, I should measure that. Anyway, the people who had better well visit timing were in better shape. And so what I'm going to tell you right now, go find the kids who fell off the wagon. Go find the kids who are missing immunizations. Go find the kids who haven't had a depression screen. Go find the kids who haven't been in for a series of clinical things and get them in or get them off your rolls. Okay? And then with the scheduling prediction, that's where I was going there a little bit. One of the things that's going to be a problem for you soon is if your well visits started slowing down again, or take a look at what's happening with your well visit schedule. We have people, because we have a little bit of both, but I have some practices who are already slowing down, but they can't, let me say this right. Let me restate this. I have a bunch of practices who are so stacked with well visits right now, they are pushing people out way too far. And so you need to, the only way you can manage that is you have to do everything you can to smooth out those well visits during the lowest time of the year. So take a look at your appointments and figure out where can if I know right now, this seems like it's a long way away, but if July, especially like often peak well visits, the next 6-8 weeks, right? This is not when you want to think about when to get people into well visits because you have so many of them. But really what you want to do is you want to be looking at your calendar for all the kids who you know are overdue, who aren't booked now, to get them booked for December and January and February when it's likely to be low again. Because you can't fit them in right now. So that's, okay, so if you look at your practice, you go to your dashboard and you see you're at 75% well visit coverage on average, which is kind of the case. So 25% of your patients are overdue. And of those 25%, let's say 10%, or let's say 40% of those patients are actually not even active anymore. You can write them off. You're really targeting this small group of 15%. You don't have to get that many to have a huge impact on your well visit coverage. And you don't have to, and knowing right now that in the third week of January, you already have 6 or 8 well visits on your books. You still have space. You still can deal with a sick wave, but you have 6 or 8 well visits on your books. That means you'll be able to sign paychecks next January should this happen again. The people who got roasted during those first few months, if I go all the way back here, the people who got killed here are in 2 categories. The people who had no cash on hand, you have no excuse for that, right? But that's a lot of people. And the people who didn't have appointments already on the books is the people who were operating like health clinics. The way you do cash flow management and prediction is to have appointments on your books already. I realize if you are booking out through January and, if you have 8 well visits in January, you might get 6 of them. But, were there days in April 2020 when you'll say, I'll take 6 well visits right now. I will drive to their houses. So that's how you do it. And that's so what I want you to think about, and I've talked about this a little bit before, but I've never gotten any traction with it because it doesn't really engage, but you need to look at your appointment book. And PCC has tons of appointment scheduling reports. You can just dump data in and do some graphing and say, wow, we don't have any well visits booked, I'm making this up, for the last 2 weeks of November. So let's call and get these kids in who we haven't seen in 6 months. Let's start talking to them about filling those spots in now. And you only need 1 or 2 or 3, and your numbers go up quite a bit. Anyway, so I was trying to end this on time because I went over last time. Do I have any questions on socio? Probably not. Can you guys tell? No questions on socio. So previously, I put up the code too early. So I have to remember, and Bastian will yell if I get it wrong. Does anyone have any questions about the content? It was so clear and so easy to follow. All right. That never happens. All right.